And Jenna Duprey joins us now. Nice to see you. Welcome.
Nice to see you, Tom. Thanks.
Nice to have you here again.
Oh, it's always nice to come back here, you know that.
Was this your first trip back to the state capitol since you left the Assembly?
It was. It seemed a little different walking into the building.
Why did you make the trip? Why did you feel it was important to go down for
I
this?
had two reasons for making the trip. First, I had already scheduled to be there on Wednesday morning because a good friend of mine, Democrat Assemblywoman Shelley Mayer from Yonkers, had picked up my Asperger's Syndrome Day resolution. Compassionate Choices reached out to me, and I've been working with them for quite a while, and their press conference on the medical aid in dying legislation was scheduled for Tuesday, and participated in that and spoke with several of my former colleagues about the legislation and the medical aid in dying bill and what I just feel is such a need to have that passed in New York State. And you know, I was able to speak on it last year because I was a member of the Health Committee and got enough votes switched to get it out of committee. This year it's kind of stalled there, so we're hoping we can at least get it moved through the committees and keep it going forward.
And for you, this is personal.
It's very personal. You know, most legislation you vote on is not. This one is very personal.
Was it both your parents?
Both of my parents. My dad died in 1994 from mesothelioma. He was a tough guy. Very, very proud card-carrying member of IBEW. And even with hospice and the prescribed morphine, didn't touch the pain. And watching that really strong, very religious man and go through those final days where there was nothing we could do to take that pain away, and it was excruciating, and it was just really hard for my mom and me to watch it.
And then you had to live through the same thing with your mother. 5
years later, my mom was having a series of strokes. She lost her ability to swallow and had a feeding tube inserted. After she'd had it for a while, it was just getting more and more difficult. And she asked me if I would support her decision to have the feeding tube removed. Certainly we both knew the consequences of that. It was all that was keeping her alive. I told her I would support her. The next day she had it taken out. And I told a couple of stories that I'll repeat here, but one I didn't tell was that after she'd had it out a couple of days, her doctor was on vacation. It was over the 4th of July weekend, and another doctor decided that the feeding tube should be reinserted. And I had quite a discussion with him, and his comment was, well, I didn't know she was your mother. And I said, it shouldn't matter whose mother she is. And I told him he had to go into the room with me and talk to her about it, because it was her decision, not mine and not his. And she couldn't speak real well then. I could understand her, but not everybody could. And she actually took a piece of paper and wrote, and I have it at home, and wrote on it, "I simply want to die," and signed her name. She never wavered. For 11 days, she didn't take any water. She took, I mean, she just was determined. And to think that she had to, and I'm sure she suffered internally and mentally, she had to. Now, would either of my parents, you know, my dad, Irish Catholic, mother born in Ireland on St. Patrick's Day, my mother a devout Methodist, would either of them have made the choice to take the medication? I don't know, but they should have had the choice.
Opponents will use the argument that that people who aren't mentally competent, the elderly, mentally, physically disabled, may be taken advantage of.
And we've had that discussion. I had it with one of my colleagues who feels very strongly that way, former colleagues, I'm saying. And, you know, my grandson Jeremy would never be able to use this medication because there would always be a question as to whether or not he would have the ability to think that through. If I didn't believe that there were enough safeguards in this legislation to protect Jeremy, I would not be supporting this bill. I think that part of what happens with some of the developmentally disabled, and maybe some of the physically disabled, but is that they have a permanent disability that they look at as terminal. But terminal illness under this legislation is described as less than 6 months to live. certified by 2 doctors, interviews by 2 doctors. The medication, I understand, is incredibly bitter. Somebody has to be willing to drink it. They say the biggest issue is people not regurgitating it. And I mean, I'm not saying it's pleasant, but when I look at 11 days versus when my mom wrote that note to that doctor, 2 days, 3 days into that, I just think it would have been more humane had she made that choice.
So this requires 2 doctors. Doctors can change their mind at any time and back out and say, no, we don't think it's appropriate.
Yes.
So you think there are enough safeguards?
I think so. I think there's still some tweaking going on. I think that some of the comments being made by legislators and by other groups are appropriate. The bill will not pass this year. So, you know, but having the discussions, again, hopefully certainly intense discussions in the Health Committee, getting it through there into the Codes Committee, where that's what they look at. Are all the protections there that need to be there? They're down to the point now where words are being changed more than the whole concept. It is based, I don't want to say entirely, but the entire template of this legislation is based on the Oregon legislation, which has been in place for 20 years and has never been challenged. And there has never been a developmentally or physically disabled person who has, or their families who have ever said they were being coerced into taking this medication. And 36% of the people who get the prescription never use it.
They make that choice.
They make that choice, but they said there is a solace in knowing it's there, should they reach that point where they want it. So, again, I think it's about choice. I think it's about government staying out of people's lives and telling people that the super government realm out there knows more about what an individual person should make for a decision than the person themselves. And I just can't go with that. I never have. You know that on other issues. And I just, again, it's a choice I want if I'm ever in that situation. You know, nobody likes to talk about death. That's part of the issue with this. None of us are going to leave here alive. And everybody hopes they just go in their sleep or they drop, or, you know, if you talk, you talk to almost anybody, that's going to be their choice. Yeah. But there are way too many people who don't have that option. And I think we should just give them the choice.
In the past, you've admitted that there were major pieces of legislation where you've changed your mind.
Absolutely.
Was this one of them, or was this a case because it affected you so personally that right from the get-go you felt that this bill was right?
You know, after I first really came out very public, as you know, I usually keep my personal life pretty private. When I first came out last year very public about this, some of the letters I received, Tim, I mean, really brought me to tears. And you know, I'm pretty strong. One woman wrote to me and said her brother had mesothelioma. When he couldn't deal with the pain, he shot himself to death. Just blew his head off. Now, what does that do for a family? And I heard so many of those stories. I bet I had 5 or 6 who said that their loved ones chose suicide in one form or another, but most of them were violent by some sort of gun. To me, for a family to be able to stand there, like so many of us have done with our pets, hold them, let them know they're loved, and watch them go peacefully. At any time that a family has to face a violent death at somebody's choosing, it's just not humane. It's just, you know, as a society, we just shouldn't be proud of that. We just shouldn't.
You talk about your father being such a strong Catholic. Yeah. Why is the church and so many religious leaders so opposed to this?
I don't know. That's a question you'd have to ask somebody higher in the church than I am. You know, I'm a Catholic, and I just, I don't know. I don't know. I just really don't. I don't understand a lot of the arguments, and maybe it's because it is too personal for me.
Religious leaders and others have really lobbied against it and continue to do so. Is that frustrating or maddening that there's such a push to defeat it?
Well, I've seen it in against other legislation, and that continues, and And I guess, you know, part of me says there should be that separation between church and state. And I'm not saying they can't have opinions and shouldn't have opinions and make them known, but I think sometimes it goes to an extreme.
Do you see it coming out of committee?
I don't know. They need one more vote out of committee. I don't know whether I charmed anybody into it while I was down there or not.
You tried to urge a few lawmakers to
well, we
support
discussed it. I think there's one or two that are really leaning.
It seems as if it won't get to the floor of the Assembly or the Senate for...
Well, Senator Flanagan came out during the press conference and said that it will not go to the floor in the Senate. So there's no way it will pass this year. I think it's like some of the others that we have dealt with. I mean, same-sex marriage, marriage equality is one. It took, what, 3-4 years?
Right. Medical marijuana. Are there issues like this that are going to take a number of years and a number of sessions?
And in ways they should. I mean, I'm not minimizing how important this is and how people need to be comfortable with it before they can vote for it. And it should be thoughtful. It shouldn't be one of those that comes up at the end of June when you're voting every 90 seconds and you don't know what you're voting on. I would be opposed to that. This is too critical to too many people. Families have to know that this is a choice, but it's not a mandate. And that's got to be a clear message. 76% of the people polled are in favor of this legislation. But one of the things that was said over and over again the other day is that this legislation, and Compassionate Choices said it, this legislation is too important for anybody to vote because of poll numbers. They have to vote because they believe it's the right thing.